We're excited to have you with us. I'm going to introduce myself first. So my name is David Knapp. I'm the Assistant Director of Research and Evaluation for the Metropolitan Educational Research Consortium. And to my left.
I'm Hillary Parkhouse. I'm a faculty member in the School of Education in the Department of Teaching and Learning.
I'm Melissa Cuba, an evaluation specialist with MERC and also a doctoral student.
Hi, I'm Monica Manns, and I'm the Director of Equity and Diversity for Henrico County Public Schools.
All right, and so this is our team who's going to be talking through our maps and sort of talking about the idea of demographic changes that we've had in our region over the past decade. But let me walk through a couple of things as we get going. First of all, here's a really quick way to access our maps. They're located in our study page on our website, which I'll show you here in just a minute. But if you wanted to hop right into it and take a look, go to tinyurl.com/MERC maps to hop in and start exploring the Tableau resources that we have available. As we're going through and talking through all this stuff, we hope that you'll feel free to just explore those and play around with them and click through and see what kind of changes you see across the MERC region for the 7 school divisions that are represented there. So if you're multitasking by taking a look at those maps, we'd certainly welcome you to do that. Feel free to play around in there. And as you're doing that, we hope you'll start to detect some things that are kind of interesting, some things that you notice in the region that you can even post in our chat feature that we can maybe talk about at the end of today. You could also just go to our website at merc.soe.vcu.edu. And you can click on projects and you'll find the maps there, and I'll show you where to locate those later on. But if you wanted to just explore our website, there's a lot of things on there as well related to our other studies, our podcast, different reports, things like that. So feel free to play around while we're talking today. And we have a chat feature that's available in Zoom that you should definitely take advantage of. So everybody's screen or everybody's Zoom account is technically muted right now. And the reason we did that is just to make sure we didn't have any kind of feedback going on. We want to make sure that everything was clear as we were talking. But we're eager to take your questions. And so there's a chat feature that you should have available in Zoom. That what you should do is just post any questions that you might have. Melissa, Hillary, and I will be answering questions throughout. But we'll also take some of those questions and turn them into some discussion points at the end here so we can talk through some of the big ideas of what we have going on. So we're eager to engage with you that way, so feel free to post questions. And as you're going through and playing around in the maps, if there's something that you find that's particularly interesting, go ahead and post it in there because we might discuss it at the end, right? Because there's lots of cool stuff that we can dig into from the Tableau graphics. Really quick, so this is research from the Metropolitan Educational Research Consortium. It sounds like everybody's at least somewhat familiar with who we are. We're a part of the VCU School of Education. In case you don't know too much about us yet, we're a partnership between the VCU SOE. We were established in 1991. And we have a partnership with 7 school divisions in the region. We have Chesterfield, Goochland, Hanover, Henrico, Petersburg, who's the newest addition to MERC, Powhatan, and Richmond. Petersburg, like I mentioned, is new to MERC, and so the maps and graphics that you're going to be seeing today don't yet reflect Petersburg. Our next steps with the map are going to be to make sure that we have those folks included in there, but you will see Colonial Heights in there, who was formerly a member of MERC, but we have Petersburg in there now, and so these are the folks that we partner with to do our research. A quick note about how we do our research. So we have study teams that are led by VCU faculty members like Hillary, who's in the room right now, and they bring with them a lot of theoretical and methodological expertise to our studies. They understand things about method, literature, all these things about research to make sure we have a really strong conceptual framework for our studies. And then we have study teams that are comprised of folks from our actual school division. So these are building level personnel, school leaders, lots of people that come in from the school divisions, and they bring with them a lot of real practical expertise. Like, what does this stuff look like in practice? And the whole kind of point of the way that we do this is that we believe that this enhances the rigor of our studies. That whenever we bring these perspectives together, it's something that enhances the rigor, and it gives a lot of meaning behind the community engaged research that we do. And so this study that we're talking about today is an example of that. We have a terrific study team that Hillary's going to be introducing to you here a little bit later on. We have multiple studies going on, so you can check out our website, mercsoevcu.edu/projects, and you can check out this this study that we have, so the Professional Development for Success in Culturally Diverse Schools study. We also have our Achieving Racial Equity in School Disciplinary Policies and Practices study. It's going to be wrapping up this winter. We'll have a report coming out from that pretty soon. And then we have our newest teacher retention study that we're really excited about. I'm sure we'll find a way to make this title much longer, because that's what we like to do with these long titles. And so stay tuned for that. But we've got study pages committed to each of these, so feel free to dig in and explore those. We also have lots of reports. So like I said, we've been around since 1991, so we've got a few decades of reports in our website that you can go through and see the kind of research that we've done. The most recent report from this study is our Context of Cultural Diversity, Professional Development in Schools. A lot of what we're going to talk about today is available in that report. And once we get finished up with our webinar today, I'm going to send everybody an email. They'll have a link for you to be able to access this report, and you can dig in. It's got some stills from the maps, but also a lot of history behind some of the stuff that we're talking about. So that's a great thing for you to look into. But there's also lots of different ways for you to engage with MERC. So we've got our podcast, which we really love. It's called Abstract. So go to our website /podcast to be able to access that, where we explore different issues in public Pre-K-12 education. We have roundtable discussions with folks from our study teams. We've got interviews with really great, interesting educators and students from our school divisions. So you can access that on our website, but also SoundCloud, iTunes, and Stitcher if you're interested. We also have our annual stakeholder conference, which we just had in October. We brought together over 200 people from the community just for the purposes of advancing public schools in the Metro Richmond region. We typically have that in October. We don't have a specific date yet for next year, but go ahead and plan for next October. You can expect the MERC conference is going to be happening. So we'll hope that we get to see you there. It's a lot of fun. We always enjoy doing that. So what are we going to talk about today? So today we're going to give a little bit of study background. So Hillary's going to be talking us through that. I'm going to give you a quick tour through the Tableau resources that we have available on our website. Melissa's going to talk to everybody about growth in English learner population in the region and some of the implications related to that using the maps and resources that we have online. Hillary's going to talk about racial diversity across urban and suburban lines, again, using those resources. So the idea with these two stories is these are the kinds of things that you can kind of detect with the resources that we have online. These are the things that you can explore with them. Monica from Henrico is going to be talking to us about some practical implications for school divisions, and then we'll wrap up with a discussion and Q&A. So again, feel free to post your questions in that chat feature so we can make sure that we answer them along the way and at the end. All right, so Hillary's going to give us an idea about the study background.
Yeah, so as David mentioned, the diversity maps that we're sharing with you today come from a larger MERC study that's called Professional Development for Success in Culturally Diverse Schools. And that study started in the spring of 2017 and will wrap up in the fall of 2019. And you can see here the list of our study team members that represent all of the MERC school divisions, including Colonial Heights, which was a member at that time, and we're adding from Petersburg. And then we also, at the bottom of the list there, have 2 representatives from the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities, which is a local nonprofit that offers a lot of the professional development in the area related to cultural diversity and multicultural education. So it's helpful to have them on the team as well, since they're the ones often implementing these PD programs. So we have 4 goals of the larger study. One is to understand the landscape of diversity within schools in the MERC region, and that's kind of where the maps come into play. The second goal is to consider the implications of changes in the MERC region for policy and practice. The third is to review the current models of professional development related to issues of cultural diversity. And the fourth is to develop and test models of PD to enhance culturally inclusive teaching and empowering school climates. And there are 3 components of the larger study. The first component is analysis of local demographic changes. So that's where we decided to start creating these maps using VDOE data. We looked at also the influences, like historical, political, social influences on the changes in demographics in the MERC region, and also the literature on PD related to cultural diversity. And as David mentioned, the report from component 1 that's up there on the top right is available, and he'll email a link to that if you would like to read more. The second component of the larger study is an action research project that wrapped up. It went the school year of 2017-2018, and we had 8 teacher action researchers from across the MERC region, different grade levels and school divisions. On the lower right there, you see a picture of one of our action researchers, Salita, who's an early elementary special education teacher, presenting a poster at our culminating showcase where each action researcher presented their posters. And if you would like to read more about their work, you can see the posters and profiles of each of the action researchers on the MERC website, on the project website. And we also have audio recordings of interviews with each of them if you'd like to listen to those on your drive or walk or whatever, bus ride. And then the last component is a survey that is going or is out to all school professionals in the MERC region. So if you are working in the MERC region, hopefully you have received it and have completed it or are going to complete it. And if you know folks in the MERC regions, make sure they've completed their survey. This is going to be really helpful for us to understand sort of the landscape of what kinds of professional development related to multicultural education teachers are receiving, how effective they feel those are, what areas they feel they are well prepared in, and what areas they could use more professional development. And this is sort of a timeline to show you where we are in each of the components. Component 1 wrapped up in the spring of 2018, and so that's the report that we've already completed. The action research report will be coming out in the next few months, and then the survey is out now, and we'll be analyzing that data in the spring and summer and reporting in fall of 2019.
It's, I mean, this is an exciting study that has a really great, big, committed team related to it. And there's a lot of interesting projects that come out from that. So once we wrap up, I really hope you'll take a look at that site and see all the great things that have been happening with the study. So I'm going to walk you through some of the Tableau resources that we have available online associated with this study that we're going to be using to tell some stories today. A quick note, so that we don't have to jump back and forth between screens. Instead of having us actually clicking through the resources online, we're going to have some videos that are some demonstrations of that. We're going to talk through the videos. But if you're like me, you learn by doing. And so please feel free to click through all those resources online as we're going through this to see how things look in your division and in the region. So really quick, if you wanted to find the Tableau resources, which I imagine you probably do, again, you can go through the tiny URL that we provided for it. But you can also go to our website, and then at the top you'll notice a little suitcase up there for projects. So if you click on projects, and then in projects you'll notice our 3 studies that are going on. And so you click on the professional development for success in culturally diverse schools study. So it's the first one that's listed right there. So if you click on that, and then when you get to that study page, you'll notice that there's a ton of stuff on there because there's a lot of components related to the study and a lot of things that are going on. But if you scroll down just a little bit, you can click on MERC division demographic changes, and that's going to take you straight to our the Tableau resources that we have available on there. Okay, so this is a video walking you through the resources that I'm going to talk through as we go through this, and I'll probably pause it along the way to point out a few things, including right here at the beginning. So you'll notice as you're going through here that the resources are available up top here, that you can click with and interact and do all sorts of things. You can interact with them on our website, or you can even just click on Tableau and it'll take you to the Tableau public site, and you can go through it on there as well. But there's also a guide to using the tools down here at the bottom. So there's it describes what each tool is for. So we have a demographic change map. We have bar graphs listed there, and then we've got these school change dots. I'm going to demonstrate all of those here in a second. It also has some notes down there about our method. So all the data that we have for this is from the VDOE fall membership reports. So we did some special requests for data from VDOE as well that contributed to this. We also did some member checking with each of our school divisions to make sure that the data was accurate. So we went through some layers of scrutiny with this as we were building the database for it. So that's just a note about what went into this. So as you're going through, it's helpful to go full screen, so to click it down there. And you'll notice on the side here, there's lots of different things that you can do that you can filter by. So you could search for different individual schools up here, which is really helpful. It's a little bit less so for the map, but it's really helpful when you get into some of these other, like the school demographic bar graphs and the different dots. You can search for schools there. For the divisions, you can actually go through and filter down with those. For the different school levels, you could do that. You can click on different demographics. And then you can see some keys that are listed down here to show how these things work. So it starts off on Latinx, but let's just to give you an example of some changes that have happened in the region. So if we clicked on our Black student population listed here, you can see how some of these changes reflected, right? And so what you can do with these is you can hover over a particular division. In Tableau speak, this is called a tooltip, and it pops up with this window to give you a snapshot of how things are looking in the division. And so you can see up top here, we have the total students for 07, 08, and 16, 17 in Goochland. So it's one of our smaller divisions. You notice the Black student percentage difference. And so what we mean by that at the division level, this is what percentage of the student population were Black students in 07, 08, and then what was the overall percentage of the student population in 16, 17 that were Black students. And then the difference there, so there's been a difference in 9.45% percentage points. And so that's not percentage change, it's percent difference. So the math people out there will appreciate that, I'm sure. But you could also look down here at the division totals, and it breaks down the different races and ethnicities. So although we're looking specifically now where it's filtered for the Black student population, if you go down there, you can see some of these other student populations that are listed there, including the other demographics that are listed down there and how those changes have occurred over the last 10 years. So we'll let this go for a little bit here. And what you can do is you can hover over different divisions as well. You could also hover over individual schools. So right now we're looking at Jacob Adams Elementary in Henrico, Monica's division. And you can see how the student population has changed over time there, and then what the percent difference is for the school in that window. And so the idea here, if you're looking at this, is if you're an educator in one of these schools, how has your student population changed over the last 10 years, and what kind of support might we want to do, provide for our educators in those schools to make sure that they're able to support a diverse student body in there. So we're going to let this run for a little bit more, and you can go through and you can zoom in if you want to on different school divisions, and you can click and drag and move this thing around to be able to really hone in on some of the things. You can see the James River kind of hidden in there. But you can see the different, some of these schools have had a really big difference in their population over time. So it's really interesting to see that broken down. And the report that we've referenced for the context of cultural diversity, professional development, shows some of the schools that have had the most dynamic changes. You could always click on this little arrow at the top, this little circle arrow, and it'll take you back to where things started. A quick note about the maps. Any school that's represented on here are schools where there was data for the 07, 08 and 16, 17 school year. And that's important to know because you can't calculate any kind of differences without both of those data points. So there's going to be some schools that aren't listed on here because the data wasn't available for a variety of reasons. It might be a new school that popped up or a school that closed at one point. It might be the data just wasn't available for that school for that year for some reason, but we made sure that those schools aren't represented on here. But they are represented on this second graphic, which are the demographic bar graphs. And so what you can do with these, like with everything else, you can filter down by school division. So if I wanted to just see Henrico County middle schools and click on that, you can see just those schools popping up here. And so the cool thing here is you can see what the population was in 07, 08, and 16, 17. You can visualize what those changes look like during that time. So you can hover over them just like you did for the map to be able to see this stuff. And so you can see what a big difference it is for some of those schools. And for some of the schools, as you scroll through them, you might notice that there isn't a bar graph for one of the years. So that might mean that there weren't any changes that were going, or there wasn't any data available for those years. And then these school percentage difference dots that are in here. So this is just showing school level data, so not division level data. But what's neat about this is that not only can you filter by divisions and everything else, but you can click and drag this slider down here and show, like if I wanted to just see the schools that had a decrease in Latinx student population over the last 10 years, you could see them disappearing from the screen there. We're going to go even a little bit deeper here because we're still, so these are just the ones that have had a decrease. You could see that across our divisions, for all of the 200 some schools that are in the MERC school divisions, there were 4 that showed a decrease in their percentage of Latinx students over the last 10 years, which is really interesting to see. And so that's what's really great about those dots is you can go through and you can actually do the filtering. You could click and drag that slider, or you can actually type it in to see what it is that, if you want to really quickly see who had a 10%, between 5 and 10% increase for the school division or for the schools, and it'll pop that up. A quick note about this: as you're going through and you're filtering in by different demographics, it'll keep the slider for that scale the same. And so you might need to click on this little guy down here, this little filter thing, and it'll reset the scale for you, like we saw demonstrated there. What's really neat about this is we develop these dots. So these first two graphics and resources were already available. And as we were writing our report, we needed to see in a really efficient way which schools had the most increase and decrease over time. And so we developed these dots to answer a question. But the whole reason why these things exist is because we needed to answer some questions related to this report. And so we hope that there's a ton of utility to this, that you can dig in and start playing around with it too, and answer some questions related to your schools as well. So as we're talking about these other things, we're going to tell some stories about them. We hope that you'll play around with these resources that we have online so you can access them and see what you find. All right. So we've got a couple stories we're going to tell related to these maps about visualizing demographic changes in the MERC region over the past decade. And we're going to start with Melissa with English language learners.
Hi, everyone. I first want to draw your attention to the handout that David sent out in an email. You could please look at that. And so before I talk about the demographic changes in our region, I want to just go through some factors to consider when we have these conversations about the student population in particular. So what we know based on data from the state is that English learners are not graduating on time. And this is both at the state level, but also in our region. And we also know that they're underperforming on SOL exams. And that's both at the state level and also here in Region 1. And so what research shows is that English learners who underperform on these assessments are less likely to graduate from high school. And so what does this mean for students? We're talking about access to different course options and potentially post-secondary outcomes. We also know that research on language acquisition supports instruction in the first language. And that not only enhances English language acquisition skills, but it also supports social, psychological, and emotional development of students. And one model of instruction that's important to keep in mind is dual language programming. And we talk about dual language programming, particularly the two-way dual language model. And a definition table is provided on the handout. If you could take a look at that and see that the definition for two-way models include both 50% English learners who speak the partner language and native English speakers who want to learn that language. And so that model is ideal for supporting both the academic and language development of English learners and native English speakers. But it also provides higher academic outcomes. It also supports higher post-secondary outcomes as well, particularly because Virginia has the seal of biliteracy. And that provides students with an award that's affixed to both their high school diploma and transcript, which pretty much means that they can speak, read, and write in 2 languages. It also helps with greater cross-cultural competence and creates a more positive cultural identity. And we know that two-way dual language programs also support a stronger school climate. In addition, there are changing policies in our landscape. So we want to keep in mind that there have been recent laws that have been passed in the state. And 2 of them are mentioned in the frequently asked questions section of the handout. One of which supports the allocation of funding that would be traditionally used for English learner programs that would focus on English only instruction and use that funding for dual language programming. The other provides opportunities to gain access to a dual language endorsement, which right now does not exist. So that both of these are in process, They have been signed, so we're hoping to see those changes come along. In addition, I mentioned before the seal of biliteracy, and that was passed in 2015. So not only at the state level are we seeing policy changes, but also at the federal level with ESSA. And ESSA, there are some contradictions there when we look at ESSA and Virginia's plan. So Virginia's plan doesn't support assessments in the first language for English learners because it states English is the language of instruction unless it's a foreign language. So we want to keep that in mind as we see these changes emerge and how we're having conversations and we're noticing tensions between federal and state institutions. And so now I bring your attention to our map, and I'm going to go over just looking at our changes here in our region. Okay, so first we're going to click on English learners and just hover over and look at the changes in Hanover, for example, Goochland, and also brings our race and ethnicity compositions as well. And look at Powhatan, which we've seen a decrease in our English learner student population. So it's important to notice the most significant changes or increases have been in Richmond, Henrico, and Chesterfield. And you can also see where, when you look at the purple dots and which schools have the greatest increases. So we're gonna zoom in and look particularly at those areas. So we see mostly South Richmond, West Henrico, and so now we're gonna look at different schools and one specific school division, Richmond. And here you're able to, get a better grasp of what is happening in these schools. For example, in Blackwell and in Green Elementary right here, where we're noticing a significant growth in the past 10 years. And so it just gives you a better idea of where these changes are happening. And then we can go to our dot feature, representing the different schools, and focus on maybe one school division if you're interested in focusing on your school division and see where the greatest percent differences are. So again, we go back to green, we see that at 60% increase, and the racial composition of the school. Read. And so while we have it here in demographics under English learners, you can also change that. You can look at the differences in all these different schools, not just elementary, but our secondary schools. And you can look at our Latinx student population. And so while we don't want to conflate English learners with Latinx students, we know there are overlaps. So we want to keep that in mind. And that's also for our Asian student population. We see Bouchal Middle School in Francis with a 21 or almost 22% increase. So just keeping that in mind as I show some more data. And here we go. Clicking on our Asian student population, which we saw a greater increase in Western Henrico, and which schools are experiencing that growth. And so while we're going through this pretty quickly, I just want to show you these features and how you can adapt the percentage differences according to what it is that you're looking for and kind of look at the different levels of growth within those school divisions. And in addition to our racial and ethnic composition, we also have other demographics, which is interesting because you can also look at our student with disabilities category as well. So I'm just going to show some extra data here. So we have, this data is from 2007 to 2008 and the 10-year difference to 2016, 2017. But the data I'm going to show here is our most recent VDOE data for Richmond. And so I just thought this is really important to highlight because we're seeing some significant growth in some of our schools. You look at George Wythe going from 3.5% to 22.6%. Lucille Brown from 3% to 24.4% English learners, and Broad Rock from 26.4% to 34.1%. And so I show this data because I just want to, highlight how quickly our schools are changing and how we can use this data, these maps, these resources, and what we know about policies and practice to inform the conversations that we have around professional development, resource allocation, and supports for our school communities.
All right, hi everyone. I'm gonna walk you through a second case study here, kind of demonstrating how you can use the maps to look at changes in other racial demographics. I'm gonna focus on Black student population and white student population across urban and suburban lines and how you can use the maps to investigate that. So again, I have a little video to show you some of the features. So here you see the default map when you first log in, the Latinx. We're going to click on white, the white student population. Oops, sorry. And you can see, remember that the orange colors represent a growth in white student population, no, decline in white student population, sorry. My Chesterfield tool tip is blocking my view. Blue represents growth. And so you can hover over Chesterfield here and see that there's been a 9% percentage point decrease in the white student population in Chesterfield over the last decade. Oh no, sorry.
That's all right.
Maybe if I just hit the space bar, is that better? Let's try it. Okay, so now we're gonna look at Richmond, where there's been an increase in the white student population. So here you see it's been a 4% increase. And now we'll look at individual schools. Remember that the purple represents increases. So Bellevue Elementary there has a 2% increase in the white student population. And the green dots indicate a decline in the white proportion of the student population. So George Mason here has seen a 40% increase. That's pretty huge in a 10-year time span. And if we want to look at some of the schools that have seen a decline, here Colonial Trail Elementary has seen a 30% decline in the student population. And now if we click on the Black demographic, we see kind of an inversion of the purple and green dots. So Goochland has seen a 9% percentage point decrease in the Black student population. Richmond, a negative 63 point difference in the Black student population. Oh, that's Green Elementary School, I'm sorry. Yeah, so Green Elementary School is one of the schools that's seen the biggest change in the Black proportion of the student population. If we go to Chesterfield, in general, not a huge change. But when we look at individual schools, we can notice a bigger change. So C.E. Curtis Elementary has seen an 11% increase in the Black student population. I think that's it. So just wanted to use that demonstration to show how you can use the maps to trace changes both region-wide and school-wide and different racial group demographics. And now I'm going to pass the mic over to Monica to discuss changes in Henrico specifically and the implications of those changes.
Hello, how are you all this morning? I want to go over some of the presenting problems that we particularly had in Henrico, but also that I think you would see statewide. So the teacher force does not reflect our new racial makeup. And there's the potential for cultural mismatch, which is causing academically limiting behavior. And I use the term academically limiting behavior because that encompasses issues like the discipline disproportionality that we're seeing, as well as the fact that we have a mismatch between our students who are attending our advanced courses and our new demographic groups. And so there is also an increased tension due to external issues that are going on in our world, and that's coming into our schools. And then there's just a lack of licensed teachers to support our English language learners, or our English learners. And so those are some of the presenting problems. And then I'll give you some idea of how we're responding to it. My recommendations is that one of the things that we try to do is to change the paradigm, to look at this gift of diversity in a positive space, because the world is changing to represent what our demographics look like in Henrico. And I really wanted to make sure that our school appreciated that we're given an opportunity to write a blueprint of success. So if we get this right in Henrico County, then we have the blueprint to give to the world about how we can get this right nationally. Because our demographic changes are just a representation of what is going on throughout the country. In order to do that, you have to first review your current policies. And I think a lot of times when you review policies with the people who sit at your table. And oftentimes the people who sit at your table are not the people who are in your demographic representation. So when you review policy, there has to be an intentional identification of people in the community that represents both the current demographic as well as the old demographic. And they're looking at the policy holistically and ensuring that it is culturally responsive. The other thing you have to do is you have to develop a common language. We talk a lot about words. We use a lot of words that not everybody understands the same. Just in the use of the term equity in my county means something different to different people. So there has to be an establishment of common language. So that way, when we're talking and using those words, everybody across the board understands the words that you're using, as well as what paradigms that you're working from. You have to develop a safe space for engagement and to have collaborative conversations. These collaborative conversations we call them color brave conversations, because when you talk about demographic changes, really what you're talking about is what does that look like and what does that mean for me? And what does that change represent for me and the space in which I'm in? And so there has to be a safe space to have those conversations, because not everybody is ready and prepared to have them, and not everybody feels comfortable. So that acknowledgement has to be made. One of the things that we talk about in around equity and diversity is a broad conversation. And so what we really do is we talk about multicultural education, and we use the James Banks's model as a guide. And that really walks you through, it gives us a lens to talk about multicultural education and to really come up with viable responses to how we're going to navigate that information. Because sometimes when you're speaking about multicultural education, you don't realize that that issue spans all groups. So one of the things that we use is the windows and mirrors paradigm, which basically is the idea that everybody in our schools to see themselves in the curriculum, and that we should see another group in the curriculum, another cultural group. And so that's a paradigm in which we had to we're working to explicitly teach to everyone, and starting with our district specialists in every single course, from math, science, reading. And so we're really trying to make sure that when we're talking about multicultural education, that there's a paradigm in which we're looking at that through. The other thing we talked about around teacher retention is that we have to make sure that teachers are aware that these demographic differences are coming. And if we have the chance to use a guide as represented on here, is that what does that mean for our schools when we see the demographic changes coming, making sure teachers are prepared, trying to put forth more time in their PD, give them more time in the schools. One of the things that we've been doing is actually giving teachers more time to collaborate and work together, and bringing in people from outside to help them understand how to engage in culturally responsive teaching practices, particularly in schools that are having these significant changes very quickly, because those tools are not just given to them. Many of these teachers have been teaching for 15 years, and they were not given those tools when they first came into the field. Oftentimes we have new teachers who've not taught for a very long time, and they've taken one class in cultural responsiveness, and they've been giving a classroom full of students who do not look like them nor come from their cultural context. And so really making sure that we provide them with the tools in PD is important. So we're doing that. We're extending the amount of PD we're offering in the summer. We're providing PD during the school time, and we're providing PD after school as much as possible. Because if we do not, we're going to lose our teachers. And as most of you all know, teachers are hard to come by. And so we really want to make sure that in support of teacher retention, we're doing some of those things. Trying to make sure I go through my list. Another thing too, when we talk about new teacher preparation, for our new teachers who are coming in, we used to only give them 4 days worth of new teacher preparation. And now we're working to give them 7 days. And in that 7 days, 2 of those days are purely going to be to support the demographic changes that we're seeing across the district. And because, again, many of our new teachers, when they're coming out of school, they've only got one course in cultural responsiveness, but they also don't have a true understanding of what that looks like in their particular schools. So when we talk about demographic changes, in Henrico County, all of our schools are so different. So what does that mean for this particular school and what that looks like? And so we're trying to make sure that teachers are given an opportunity to work with teachers who are successful in those schools to identify how they can kind of broaden their toolbox from day one. So I think those are the things that we're doing within Henrico County.
Thanks, Monica. I wonder if you could share with everybody what your position is and maybe how it was created in response to these shifting demographics that we've seen in the division.
Okay, so my position is the Director of Equity and Diversity. One of the things that the position was created because we have had some historical problems around equity and diversity that have caused us to have had to be in the media for some issues that probably were not the best representation of who we were. And so that created I would like to call a crisis situation. And so my position was created in response to that, to be honest. But there's a recognition that the crisis situation came from the fact that no one addressed the inequities that have been ongoing for many years. And so when the position came forward due to some of the crisis situations that had been put out, that had happened recently, when I came in, I actually did a listen and learn session, and I went out and talked to all of our magisterial districts. I met with about 150 parents to really make sure we could establish an understanding that there were some historical issues of inequities and some concerns about diversity in the district. And from that, we were really able I was able to present the information to our public to say that these issues were not one-offs. These crisis situations were not one-offs, but there was actually some history behind it. And I think that was really important because people believe my position was created for the crisis situations are to be a response to those situations, and not that there had been these historical problems. So I give that context because there is a belief out there that we are really working on countering about the creation of my position.
Thank you for sharing that. We've got a little bit of time here for discussion and question and answer. Remember that you could post questions to the chat feature, and whenever you post your questions, if you'll just make sure that it gets sent to everyone, that way we'd be able to address it. But in the meantime, I'm going to kick us off with a couple of questions that I've been sketching down. So the first one is for Melissa. So as you were talking through some of the EL changes that we noticed in the region, some folks might have noticed that on those maps and on the bar graphs especially, you can notice that there's some schools that didn't have any EL data. And so I'm wondering if what you've noticed about the consistency of the data related to English language learners in Virginia, and if you think it might be possible that there's some schools where we've seen increases anecdotally, but we don't even have the data yet to support how much this is an increasing population.
So with the data that's available, I think when there's a certain number, I think it's 10 students or less, or is it 30? But it's a certain amount of students. When it's any less than that they don't report, and so that data isn't disclosed. It isn't publicly available. But I think that the consistencies is that we see maybe not growth across the entire region, but in pockets, particularly for that specific student demographic.
Okay. Yeah. So it's possible there's more going on there than we know.
And it also depends on what the programming model they have within that school. Some school divisions have itinerant ESL teachers, and so they're dispersed and serving students throughout the school division. Others have centers, and so if they have centers, you're going to see concentrations.
Thanks. So Monica had mentioned James Banks' model of multicultural education. Hillary, is that part of our survey? Is that sort of the framework, or is that contributing to it?
Yes, so we developed the survey by looking at, at least 30 pre-existing surveys related to teachers' perceptions of their self-efficacy in working with diverse students, and their culturally responsive teaching skills and related topics. And then we pulled out items and kind of grouped them by using the James Bank framework, which has 5 dimensions. It has a dimension of content integration, so to what degree do teachers include topics and lessons that represent the students in their classrooms, cultural backgrounds. One is knowledge construction, so to what degree do lessons have students interrogate how knowledge gets constructed through certain cultural assumptions and perspective. One is empowering school culture, so so some of our survey questions ask teachers to talk about to what degree they feel their school supports students of different backgrounds and empowers them. And then another is prejudice reduction between students. And then another is equity pedagogy, which is what a lot of the questions pertain to.
Okay. That sounds like such an interesting survey. I wish I had
an
opportunity to take
you can take it. You can take our pilot one.
So that's in people's inbox right now, probably. So Melissa, one of the things that folks might have noticed whenever they're looking at these graphics is a pretty important demographic variable to consider is economic disadvantage, for example. We're thinking about that, and for the next steps of it, do you want to talk a little bit more about what our plans are for dealing with that data?
Yeah, so we're trying to actually operationalize and figure out how to define what that means, particularly for school divisions that, for example, Richmond and Petersburg, where students, every student receives free lunch, right? The free and reduced price lunch option under the school communities provision. And so we're trying to figure out how we can show those disparities across the region. And in addition to looking at economic disadvantage, potentially using Title I data and also free and reduced price lunch, we're also looking at space. So that would be urban, suburban, and rural spaces, and how to define those using the literature and also show differences across this region. So yeah, that's really important too.
So that's pending. That'll be coming eventually. Will be posted to the map.
Right. And I think we're also working on adding additional data in the middle. I think 5 years within this 10-year span, and potentially more data so we can show recent changes as well.
Great. We've got a question from the incomparable Jenna Lenhart. So for Monica and the team, but I think this is pretty well suited for Monica to answer. How have you noticed veteran teachers and staff in your region or in your division reacting to some of the rapid demographic changes that we've seen? And I'm paraphrasing Jenna's question, but because the demographic shifts have changed so rapidly, what have been some of the reactions to folks in the division, and maybe what kind of PD, like how are you approaching PD with that in mind?
So some of the responses, it depends on what demographic group is changing and how it's changing. The responses are very different. So groups that are becoming more, if the diversity looks, and I'll be very honest, if the diversity looks more Asian and they are not, the response is actually very positive. We've had some of our demographics where we have far more Asian students in that, and so the response for them has been very positive. The issue, though, is that they have not been addressing the diversity by ensuring that the curriculum is representative of that group. So we don't get the negative response for the group coming in are changing the diversity of the schools. The issue more so is that the teachers are not ensuring that the curriculum is reflective of the new students in that space. And so that then becomes the issue where we're trying to work on training the teachers up in that area. That is important that the students see themselves in the curriculum. Mm-hmm. So for there, a lot of the work that we've really been doing with them is educating them on the difference. And then the other issue, though, is often between student to student, and then the teacher's response to that. So meaning that there are peer-to-peer issues and conflicts, and sometimes the teachers are either unaware or don't know what to look for or don't recognize the significance of it. And so then the new students in those spaces feel marginalized. And there's harassment that may not being addressed. So then there's a lot of education we're doing with the teachers in those spaces on what that harassment potentially looks like and the importance of responding in a resolute manner. So there's a lot of education around those spaces in that. In the demographics where the African American students are moving into those spaces, or Hispanic students are moving into the spaces, the issues are very different. There's a space that, and it begins with you're having to educate them on the cultural engagement components, the cultural responsiveness components of how students interact. They don't interact the same way as many of our teachers do. So that means they like to talk in class a lot. So silence for them, it's not something that they are comfortable with, and they want increased engagement and collaboration. And many of our teachers really struggle with that because they think that if you're silent, then you're working well. And I don't think that works for any students. It doesn't work for our Black and brown students. And so there has to be different types of engagement patterns set up in the classes from day one, because if not, many of the issues then become discipline issues. And so we really have to go in and focus, and we're working on focusing a lot on student engagement, because if we can get our student engagement practices up, then we don't have to worry as much about the discipline that may be forthcoming. And trying to make sure our teachers buy into that is in addition to the issue of ensuring that our students are seeing themselves in the curriculum. So it's a little bit more complex when you're moving in our Black and brown students into spaces where the teachers, where there's a cultural mismatch between the two, between teachers and students. So I try to talk about that, because Henrico County has some very different variations of how our diversity looks.
Thank you for sharing that. We've got, we'll say one more question from Kate here, and then we'll wrap this up about, are you aware of any intentional next steps from partnering divisions in MERC to share and react to this powerful information? I'll just say kind of anecdotally, the interactions that I've had with folks in the school divisions once these came out, there's been a lot of questions about, a lot of interest in being able to apply this information to the work that they're doing. What I think it's great about having these resources is that ultimately we'll have reports that are coming out from this study that'll provide, recommendations and policy implications and implications for practice in the school divisions. But by putting out a resource like this right away and continuing to build on it for future years, this is something that people can go ahead and interact with along the way before we even make any recommendations from it. So I know that people are actively engaged with the tools. Just kind of looking at the numbers of people who have actively engaged with it on Tableau, it's gone up a good bit recently since it's been released. So I know that people are interacting with it, which is great. And that's what our goal is with that, is that we'll offer our own recommendations from the study, but truthfully, the folks in the school divisions like Monica and other people who are doing this work are the ones who really know how best to apply the data. And so that's what our goal is from that. And I think that's a pretty good segue into what our next steps are with this. So Hillary, do you want to walk us through really quick what we're going to be doing?
Sure. So as David mentioned early on, we'll add Petersburg data to the map since they're a new MERC member, and also add midpoint data, so that we'll have not just a 10-year span, but also be able to look at change over the 5-year intervals. We're also collecting the surveys from all of the school division teachers, administrators, counselors, all school personnel. So we've already gotten, I think, 2,000 responses or maybe more. So that'll give us a lot of really helpful data, related to the question of how teachers are responding to these changes. And the action research report will come out very soon, in the next few months, if you want to know more about what those 8 action researchers did in terms of cultural diversity in their own classrooms. And our survey report will come out in the summer of 2019.
So lots of things to look forward to with this study. We're eager to stay in touch with you. So if you have any kind of burning questions left from this conversation, feel free to shoot us an email at our website, or at our email address, soemerc@vcu.edu. We'll be happy to engage with you there. And there's more information on our website about this study at our website. So mercsoevcu.edu/projects. You can learn more about this study and our other research going on. Listen to our podcast episodes. Get excited about the conference next year. There's lots of ways to engage with us. And we're grateful for our partnership with you and for you being here today. And stay tuned for future webinars coming your way.